Okay, we're recording. That's my cue. So we will get started. Again, good morning. My name is Kristen, and from everyone of us on David's team, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you. And we're just so grateful for you to committing to spend this time with us today. We know how busy you all are, and it's not always easy to take this time, but we're really confident that today's session is going to have a real and lasting impact on your leadership. It's a great session. And for anyone joining us for the first time, I just want to take a moment to share a little bit about David. David has more than 35 years of experience as a family therapist, workshop facilitator, lecturer, and advisor to leadership executives from all over the world. He is a best-selling author, respected thought leader, and sought-after speaker. David is so passionate about helping leaders lead better, and these monthly webinars are just one of the many ways that David is able to share his message and his knowledge with as many people as possible. So thank you again for being here today, and thank you for being a part of this incredible, diverse community. It's always so exciting to see leaders from all over Canada in various lines of work and stages of their life and career, with the common bond of wanting to show up as the best versions of themselves. As you all know, when it comes to leadership, the journey and the responsibility never end. So without further ado, here's David.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Kristen, for your usual great energy. And it's just wonderful to have you all here. We're going to go an hour and a half. So here's how kind of the format works. I'm going to talk with you for about an hour. I'm going to be putting Kristen on the spot this morning because she's going to have some input on some questions that I'm going to ask her. And then we're going to talk for about an hour, and then we will have a half an hour of dialogue and questions and responses. So I'll be on for another half an hour after we're finished. I hope you can join us till the end. But the formal part of the presentation will last until the hour, and that's when we will stop recording, so that we'll have a good open dialogue and keep your anonymity. I also want to say that our numbers were a little bit down this month, and we were beginning to wonder why. And then I started to realize that, oh my gosh, it's the middle of an American Thanksgiving weekend, and being Canadian centric, I forgot that our friends south of the border have a holiday this weekend. So I know that we missed a few coming in. But if you happen to be here from the United States, please put that in in the chat room. Let us know where you're from, no matter where you're from, by the way. But we just especially want to welcome our American friends in case there's some here that joined us in the middle of your holiday weekend. All right, having said that, I'd like to be very transparent with you and very upfront. A big part of our agenda and reason for doing this is to introduce you to our Authentic Leadership Academy, which is a 4-day, 3.5-day really. And now it's going to be an in-person event, and we're just working out the details of the venue. So stay in touch; it'll be on our website. If you have any interest in this specifically, you have some questions, you'd like to have a conversation with me, just email me, and I'd be glad to help you with that and set up a conversation with you. We also, I'm so proud, our team has worked so hard over the last 6 months to develop these what we call SAGE forums, which are peer mentoring programs, peer mentoring support groups for helping you stay accountable and staying on track to live authentic lives and to lead authentically. We've had our first one started this fall. We're very proud of that, and we've got our next one starting in January. So keep in touch. Those are on our website, all the details on that. And again, if you have any questions about what those SAGE forums are, by all means, reach out and we'll help you out there. All right. We're going to go on a journey today. As all of you know, I'm not just here to talk at you. I'm going to share my own experience. I'm going to share my own story. And I hope that we will jointly go on a journey together here in the process of understanding what it means to engage people and create cultures that people are inspired to come to work in the midst of a labor shortage. So I use this metaphor of a pit stop. I don't know much about car racing, but I understand that the race is won as much in the pit stop as it is on the track. Folks, we all got to stop every once in a while. And so many of us today are so busy running around the track, and we're so busy going and going and going and going. Eventually, if we don't take a pit stop, we're going to blow up. And then what happens is we blow up the cars, and then we say, well, the problem was a bad car. Let's get a new car in here. And then we run that car into the ground. So you're going to have whatever metaphor, whether it's sharpening the saw or stopping and taking a pit stop, you've got to stop every once in a while and get your bearings. This is a big part of our SAGE forum, is that we have people stop on a monthly basis and really talk about self-awareness and community, about just checking in with how you're doing. Don't ever get so busy doing that you don't have time to think about what you're doing. Everybody is busy today. And, you know, it's interesting, whenever you hear it's a badge of honor, right? I'm busy. You know, the worst thing you could do is go to a party and ask, you know, be asked, how are you? And say, well, I'm not very busy today. You know, we'd begin to look for somehow the crazy reason we'd look down on you. But the point is that if you're busy, and we all are, we've got busy lives, but you make the time to get here today. And I really trust that this is going to have value for this hour and a half that you spend with me. But the question to ask is, you know, how are you? I'm busy. Then the next question is it a good busy? And the interesting thing is that you have to stop being busy in order to answer that question. You can't continue to be busy and answer that. You got to stop and look inside. The world can't give you an answer to the question of whether this is a good busy or not. So anyway, we're here to reflect. So I'm going to show you, start off with this slide for those of you who like a little bit of slides and research, and just to know that I've done a little bit of homework on this. This is what is called the Canadian unemployment to job vacancy ratio. So what you do, this is a fairly good statistic about what our job vacancy rate looks like right now. So if you take the number of employed and divide that by the job vacancy, you come up with this number. And back in 2016, you can see it was 4.5. Now it is 1.4 in 2022. Now there's a variety of reasons for that. During this pandemic, I think a lot of people have done a lot of thinking about their careers, about their life, and have said, you know what, I don't want to be working in this job continually anymore. A lot of people have retired. So this is an opportunity for us all. Now, this particular statistic is related to 5 fundamental job areas in our society: construction, manufacturing, retail, trade, healthcare, accommodation, food services. If you're in one of those, you will know the impact of this, but these are not the only industries that are impacted by a low job market, by difficulty finding employees. Everybody, but if you're dealing with any of these, the message that I have is be patient, because this is a tough battle. But what I want to say to you today will certainly respond to this. But I also want to say that my message today is really also independent of this. So this is just good leadership, what I'm going to talk about today, and the tools and the perspective that I'm going to offer to you today, regardless of what the job market or what the current reality looks like in our job marketplace. I'm going to refer to you a book that I read back in it was written back in 1991 that was very pivotal in beginning my career and really honing in on this and the principles that James Autry used. And he was a Fortune 500 executive. And basically what he said, the book starts with 3 fundamental statements. Number 1 is that work can provide an opportunity for spiritual and personal as well as financial growth. If it doesn't, then we're wasting far too much of our lives on it. Folks, we'll spend, if we live long enough, we'll spend about 60,000 hours at this thing called work. And as Dr. Phil would ask us, how's that working for you? We spend a great deal of our life in our jobs at this thing called our work. And how fulfilling is it for us? What's it really like? And I think the pandemic has taken us into some reflective questions about this. About a year before the pandemic, I was asked by a CEO to walk around an organization and assess the value of the culture and the strength of the culture and the health of the culture. And I started to ask conversations, and I walked into a little cubicle at that time. I never forget this. And this guy had a screensaver on with a number. And I said, well, what's with the number? And he said, well, that's how many days I have left until I retire. Now, maybe that's not such a bad thing, but the guy had like 4,000 days, and he's just counting the days. Folks, I think we can all agree that life is too short to be counting the days, right? It's interesting. I did some of my graduate work. I worked in the prison system as a. I'll just before I revert to the next point here. I worked in the prison system as a resident graduate student, and it's very interesting. In prisons, they'll talk about, you know, at the coffee breaks, they'll talk about how many years you got left, how many years you got left, how many years you got left. Well, don't, you know, you can tell an unhealthy culture by people talking about how many years they have left until they retire. Don't let your workplace, folks, turn into a prison. The workplace is rapidly becoming the new neighborhood, and business people are helping make that happen. I found this very interesting 30 years ago that this statement was made. And good management is largely a matter of love, or if you're uncomfortable with that word, call it caring, because proper management involves caring for people, not manipulating them. This was really the foundational principles that began and formed my whole work. What if, folks, we could create workplaces that were places where people actually love to come to work? I hear this so seldom, that people love to come to work. They love their job. Now, this happens to be a stock photo, and it's easy to take a photograph. It's easy to get an award that says this is the top, you know, you're in the top 100 cultures in the country. And it's easy to take a snapshot of that, and then you get into the culture and you find out what it's really like. And what you've done is just gone through a bunch of hoops to get to be the top 100 best cultures in the country. I've worked a lot with where there's a lot of incongruence and a lot of hypocrisy, and I guess there is in all organizations to some degree, or in all life. But the point is, what's it really like? I'm not saying that you have to love it every minute, but for the bulk of our time, I mean, this is marriage, right? No one will tell you that they're 100% fulfilled in every minute of their relationship. It's bloody hard work at times. You know, that's why they call it work, because it is work. But what if we actually enjoyed it most days? What if we actually looked forward to coming to work? And when people say now, oh, I'd rather work remote, yes, certainly maybe there's a pull, but there's also an opportunity to say, what is it about our workplace that people would rather stay home than come to work? Inside the organization. Sure, maybe there's some conveniences, but I think there's an opportunity for what you're going to learn here is a pit stop conversation, and that just accommodating people isn't necessarily get to the root of what is underneath people's desire to stay home. Maybe it's an opportunity to look within our culture and to say, what if we could create a place that would inspire people to leave a good work, a good home environment? Now, yes, we obviously have to be more flexible today. That's what the pandemic has taught us. But don't let flexibility turn us into complacency. As Doug Conant, the former CEO of Campbell's Soup Company, who called himself the chief emotional officer, is to win in the marketplace, you first have to win in the workplace. That's what we're talking about. So I'm going to use a little metaphor here and talk about it, particularly coming out of this pandemic. Bear with me as I kind of present this kind of philosophical base here. I've worked a lot with farmers. I grew up with farming. I've grew up on a farm, and I've worked a lot with farmers over my career. And I work with farmers that are very conscious, who are very intentional around creating what is called regenerative agriculture, where you can take, you know, and many of, you know, you can take the soil on the left, this environment on the left, and compare it to the health of the environment on the right. And I think we could learn a lot from agriculture around renewing or being renewed, especially after being damaged or lost. And I think we could all agree that to some degree or another, our cultures have been beat up in the last 2.5 years. And yes, who would want to come to that culture on the left? And I think what's proven here is that it isn't the climate, it isn't the annual rainfall, it isn't the annual temperature that determines this. What it is good management. What it is how we lead and how we manage. You'll see on this, on the right, the value of diversity. And we certainly understand the value of diversity. It's not just politically correct to be diverse. It's a healthy ecosystem that's diverse. This is what we learn on the land. Diversity isn't just about racial diversity, though, and about gender diversity. It's about thinking diversity. It's about talent diversity. Do we have a diversity of the way that people think? But I'm getting ahead of myself. When a flower doesn't bloom, you change the environment in which it grows. You don't fix the flower. This is my mentor, Virginia Satir, who was a world-renowned family therapist back in the early 80s. No plants ever grow better because you demand that they do so or because you threaten them. Plants grow only when they have the right conditions and are given the proper care. Cultivating the best environment and the proper nourishment for plants and people as well is a matter of continual investigation and vigilance. So what we're saying here is we need to continually investigate this, step off of that treadmill, step off the racetrack and take a stop. So I work with very sophisticated ranchers and farmers, and what they talk about biodiversity and water cycle and mineral cycle and ecological succession and energy flow. And what I've done is I've taken that same model and I've adapted it into human systems. And I talk about regenerative organizations. How do we create regenerative organizations that's got this kind of good energy flow in it? And I'm going to boil 40 years of research and thinking and observation and learning and teaching into 3 fundamental words that you have to pay attention to in your culture if you're going to create a culture that attracts and retains your best people in a labor shortage, but at any time. Number 1 is you got to have a strong community. Number 2, you got to have maturity. And number 3, you got to have authenticity. This is my premise and it's my bias and it's what I found in my research. So let's go through these. This will be the framework that I'm going to operate from in the work that we do in the morning for this call today. First of all, you got to know how to build a community. Any teacher on this call, anybody that has kids in class knows that a teacher has to take a classroom and turn it into a community. If you don't turn a classroom into a community, you have nowhere to start. That's where your leverage is. That's what engages people. And this is a fundamental leadership. Now, a leadership ability. Now, we could spend the day just talking about how you build a community, but I'll give you my premises. It has to do with the levels of engagement. So on the outside is what we call superficiality. It's polite, it's proper, it's political. In the middle, and by the way, that's where we spend our time, impression management. This is where we start of all relationships. It's understandable. You walk into a cocktail party. It's polite, it's proper, it's political, especially if it's in Canada. It'll be, we like to be polite after all, and we try to make an impression. But people spend their sometimes entire career trying to make an impression in their organizations, trying not to, rock the boat, trying not to tell the truth. I always say the lack of engagement, the opposite of engagement isn't, folks, disengagement. The opposite of engagement is polite. Now, what's in the middle there is community, and it's genuine and it's safe and it's caring. This is where we got to go below. I've seen a lot of marriages who never get into even the community level, who live at that superficial level. And then in the middle is intimacy. Now, I don't for 1 minute expect that our organizations have to be intimate. That's where you open your whole self up with another person. We all need boundaries in every community. We all need to say yes and we need to say no. But we must be able to function within that community circle. And that's what we're going to focus on. And what I'm going to suggest is that we need to connect to people's values within that community, within that community structure. This is what holds a community together, is an alignment around values. Now, I can give you lots of research around this. If anybody wants to know where this research came from, this has to do with community values and engagement. So this is clarity about organizational values and clarity about personal values. Where do you get the most engagement from people? When they're clear about organizational values or where they're clear about personal values? First of all, we don't do a good job of clarifying organizational values. A lot of us have, most of us, I'm going to suggest, have value statements, but we've never turned those value statements into values. I think we all understand intuitively that value statements are different than values. I don't know if you've ever been in a hotel and you've seen, hey, we put customers first as one of our primary values. Well, that's, it's a statement, but then you talk to the clerk and you wonder, did this person read the mission statement? Did they read the value statement? And so we get the statements, but we don't have the values. So how do we really get those organizational values into people's hearts? How do we clarify personal values? Unless we marry those two, we all know that this quadrant is going to have your highest engaged people. And this quadrant is going to have your lowest engaged people. That doesn't surprise me. What really surprised me from this literature is that this quadrant, quadrant D, is almost as engaged as quadrant B, and quadrant A is almost as disengaged as quadrant C, which means that when it comes to engagement and building a great culture, organizational values really don't mean a whole lot. Part of it's because we don't find a way of applying that. And I'm going to show you how to make those values real. But what we're saying is we have to get to people's personal values. You think back in your own careers, in your own life, and think of where you were the most engaged and where you were drawn to, where you wanted to show up for. And it was where you were acknowledged or unacknowledged, connected to your values, when you were living your values. And we historically have done a very poor job of understanding why and what people's values are. Let me assure you, if you want to attract and retain talent, be sure that you know the values of the people that you're wanting to attract and retain. Now, we are not historically taught how to do that. How do you know what people's values are? You could ask them. That's something that would be, common sense. That, how many of you, that simple question, have been asked in a job interview or of your team, what do you value? What's important to you? And then actually care enough to listen. So I'm going to use a little metaphor here. And I grant it, I understand, not all of you are raising teenagers right now. Not all of you are even parents, but I will promise you that you had parents and that you were a teenager at one time. And if you've ever walked into a room like this, I want to show you why it's difficult for us to know how to connect with people's values. Because we get so engaged in the racetrack, we forget about the pit stop. We get so engaged in the expectations that we miss the conversation. So here's a typical conversation that you've either had, if you've had teenagers, you've had this conversation. If you haven't had teenagers, you're not a parent, you've had this conversation with your parents in one form or another. Here's what it looks like. Father, your room is a mess. You better clean it up. Teen, I don't have time. I have a paper due. Father, you'd feel better if your room was clean. Teen, no, I won't. I like it this way. Father, but how do you find anything in here? Teen, I know where everything is. Father, that's ridiculous. Human beings don't live this way. Teen, this human being lives this way and thinks it's just fine. Father, don't your friends find it disgusting? Teen, no, my friends' rooms all look like this. Now, there's three responses. Typically, and I'm going to bet that after this kind of a conversation or some variation of it, you have three responses. Number one is the vast majority will operate in under one of these three responses. Number one, you just walk away, say, I'm going to choose my battles. You close the door and ignore it. Number two, you have a fight and you drill further and harder and draw and build the wedge deeper into that relationship and push harder. That's like pushing harder on the keyboard when your computer doesn't work. That's not going to end well. Or number three is which is very prevalent today, which is you go in when the kid isn't there and clean it up for them. That's like raising kids in a hotel and we just clean it up after them. Now, I'm not going to say, this is not a parenting workshop. Any one of those three responses, I'm not going to say is right or wrong. But I'm going to suggest if that's one of your responses, you have missed an opportunity. And I'm with you. Those would be one of the three responses I would typically do. It's a common response. But if you have one of those three responses, you have missed a values conversation. And this is what so often happens. We have an expectation. We have an expectation that you have to get this room cleaned up, just like we have an expectation at work. And in the need to have an expectation and get the job done, nothing wrong with the expectation, but the expectation erodes the values conversation. So if I had my wits about me, now I don't know anything about this kid. This is a stock photo again. But here's what I would like to get curious about. you can tell a lot. And one thing about teenagers, they are meticulously clear about their values. And if you want to connect with a teenager, what you do is talk to them about their values. The problem is you'd say, well, my kid doesn't talk to me about my values. Then ask yourself, do you create a safe place for those values to come out? Let me tell you, you're not going to teach I don't know how old this kid is, 15 years old. You're not going to teach a 15-year-old much more about their values. You're pretty much done after about 8 or 10 years old. Those values are embedded. Now, if that kid said to you, well, I value drugs, well, wouldn't you want to know? What we'd want to do is jump all over him and say, no, you can't value drugs. You know that's the wrong value. And then ask yourself why they don't talk to you about their values. Well, don't you really want, if you're a parent, or wouldn't you not have wanted your parents, if that honestly is one of your values, would you not want your teenager to be for you to be the first person that they tell you about that? Because that creates a conversation. Well, what is it about drugs that's important? You say, here's what I observe. You can observe a lot about a kid's values by what's closest to them, where they spend most of their time. Let's suppose this kid hangs out on their bed most of the time. Well, we first of all know what's on that device. So I want to know what they value because of what they're watching on that device. I'm not suggesting here that you don't have boundaries and you don't have rules, but I'm suggesting you got to open that conversation. But here's another one of my curiosities about what this kid values. There's 2 stuffies sitting close to him. I'd be really curious. And so if we created an opportunity for that kid to tell you what they value in a safe and caring place, then we can begin to keep that conversation going during their teenage years, and that we can begin to negotiate and manage those values. So how do you get to people's values? What I learned from WestJet back in the 90s, when they had a great culture, what I learned is the way to get to people, the way to get to corporate values is to tell stories. They never started, I learned so much from WestJet. They never started an operational meeting without a story. And so what are our stories? So in our firm, we value accountability. We have a list of values that we hold to be important. And no matter what we want to develop is what you shine a light on. So where's the stories? What stories do we have around our corporate values? And then shine a light. Where did we in the last week live that value? Let's tell stories about it. It's one of the ways that we begin to build this thing called community, where people open up their values around their stories. This is a community circle, and this is an opportunity for you to get connected to people's personal values in your life. Now, I have used this circle when I come in and work with a team that's been through trauma. And I think one could argue that these last 2.5 years have been somewhat traumatic, and we've gone through some trauma. And as we regenerate and rebuild our systems, this is a great way to start to build community. And it's called this honoring the self model. And what it does, what you do is you tell a story about, you could use the pandemic. Everybody in the last 2.5 years has a story. You can do this one-on-one if you feel that there's not enough trust on your team. You could do this with a personal relationship. You could do this with one of your kids. You could do this with a significant, if you're a parent. You could do this with a good friend or a partner in your life, a significant other. What is your story in the last 2.5 years? What's your story in the last month? What emotion accompanies that story? What did you learn from that experience? And what you want the future to be about? And where does that have to fit into what your values are? Because that will lead you to what people's values are. And you can't build and attract and retain a great culture until you can really begin to understand where people's values are. And frankly, we just don't have the tool. We just don't have, it's not part of our usual functioning where we talk about people's values. Now, you always want to respect the right. If people don't want to talk about their values, that's okay. But they need to know that you care about their values, and that your work will support their values. So there's got to be an alignment between the organization's values and the people's value and the employees' values. And they got to know that. Now, many people have had such a bad judgmental response whenever they have expressed their values in any authority figure in their life. They just don't want to even talk about it. So you have to really create a safe place for people to do that. Now, I'm going to share with you my own personal story here. to illustrate what I mean here. My own team, who many of are on this call, haven't heard this story, I don't think yet. But this would illustrate to me, if I were to do this exercise today, I want to model the way here and show you how this is done. This would be my way of showing what my values are, is through a story. So we live on the edge of a 200-acre nature conservancy. And in that nature conservancy this fall, there has been a rich supply of berries, wild berries, amid the forest and amid the fields. And in that ecosystem, we have a bear that has come in and become our neighbor and lived there for about 6 weeks. Now we coexisted with this bear. We respected each other. Whenever we were wandering through the ecosystem, the bear would very graciously, if we happened to run into the bear, would very graciously climb a tree. And we would respect each other. And we grew to love and appreciate this bear. But this darn bear, we live about a kilometer from our community and a neighborhood. And this bear wandered off, went into a neighborhood and got into garbage. And this bear had to be euthanized. And I am still, this was a month ago, and I am still reeling from this. And what this does is it indicates my value for allowing people. This story represents to me my core value, to allow people to be who they are, to allow people to be authentic, to allow people to bring their gifts and their essence to wherever they do, whatever they're doing, and then to see if we can align an organization around that. And it also illustrates my value of compassion. I can still get very sickened by this. And I'm not here to blame anybody. It's just a very sad situation. All right, so that's community. What are we doing to create a safe place for people to tell the truth, for people to be who they are? Again, we could spend a lot more time with that. I'm gonna go through maturity fairly soon, and then I want to hear from Kristen here. I learned about maturity from my mother, predominantly, although I had a lot of role models in my life. After she passed, first of all, she died broke. She spent all my inheritance, as she should have. I didn't, I don't have any right to that inheritance. She has a choice as to what to do with that inheritance. But what I did find was in her will, I found directed to me a definition in her will. I got a quote book, and in her quote book, I found this definition: the ability to do a job, whether or not you're supervised, finish a job once you start it, carry money without spending, well, 2 out of 3 is not bad, and be able to bear an injustice without wanting to get even. How's that for a definition of maturity? Maturity doesn't come with age, it comes with the acceptance of responsibility. You will not build a great culture without maturity. My question would be, how are you hiring for maturity? What stories are you getting in the hiring process? What are you doing in terms of promotion to measure maturity in your organization? And it has to do with the difference between a consumer and a citizen. And a consumer needs satisfied by expecting others people to change. Happiness comes from outside themselves. They're a taker. It's a scarcity mentality, and the grass is always greener somewhere else. If we just have enough stuff, if I just buy enough stuff, I define myself by the clothes that I wear. I define myself by the number of followers I get in social media. I define myself by the house that I live in. This is a consumer mentality, and I find it very fascinating that we have this thing called a consumer society. Rather than waiting or expecting others to meet their needs, they choose to be accountable for the well-being of the whole. They're givers. It's an abundance mentality, and the grass is always greener, not somewhere else, but where you water it. This is a citizen mentality. How are we hiring for citizenship? And making sure that, are we building citizens? If we just don't get citizens, it's going to be very, very difficult to build cultures that attract and retain great people. My mother, and this is the little shack that she was raised in with 10 kids, a 900 square foot shack. What she taught me was always make your gratitude bigger than your circumstances. Don't ask what the world can give you, ask what you can give to the world. She was a big John F. Kennedy fan. With the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated, I walked in my kitchen, my back door, and my mother was lying on the floor crying after his assassination. It's not my job to make you happy. It's my job to make you into a good citizen. So this is what I learned about maturity. Maturity is decide that all blame is a waste of time. Mental health is enhanced by choosing self-respect over pleasure. Do what's hard to do, not just what's easy to do. Reconcile your past, lean into the hard stuff, and embrace the cracks in your life. They're all going to be a part of your life. Life is not always easy, but it's about having the maturity to face it, okay? How do you know that you matter in an organization? This is a critical question that we all need to ask ourselves. How does your team know that your team matters? And the analogy that I use is, how does a flower know that it matters? A flower is what I would call a good citizen. Does a flower, if they never get noticed and they never get told that they matter, do they get anxious and depressed and suffer and feel worthless? No, they just keep growing. That's what good citizens do. Be the person that you're meant to be. This is the work of a citizen, right? Citizens develop a personal mission. What kind of whether you have a statement or not, I don't care, but they have a personal mission. What kind of a person will I show up as today? This is would be my to-be list. We all have to-do lists. Would be my to-be list. Be accountable, be generous, and be courageous. I never live up to that, but it's what I know that I need to do today. That's where the solution lies. Now, as citizens, if you decide to leave a relationship, maybe you leave an organization that you work in, maybe you leave a primary relationship, maybe you leave a partnership relationship. Before you leave a relationship, though, here's what good citizens are aware of. Don't leave when you're angry and empty. Don't leave when you're frustrated. Instead, leave when you're full and happy. You give your whole heart and soul there, and then you realize this organization doesn't deserve me. And it's time to move on because I can't bring my full self here. All right. Now, I could spend a whole session on maturity. Those of you who hang around me very much know that it's a big value of mine around maturity and accountability and citizenship, whatever you want to call it. But I want to spend the rest of the time talking about authenticity. And this is where, we define, authenticity is, the best way for me to describe authenticity is to revert back to a Rainier Rilke poem. This clumsy living that moves lumbering as if in ropes reminds us of the awkward way that the swan walks. And to die, which is letting go of the ground that we stand on and cling to every day, is like the swan when he nervously lets himself down into the water, which receives him gaily and which flows joyfully under and after him. If you take that swan and give him a performance review and tell that swan while he's struggling on the land to perform better and to work harder and to be accountable and to come and join your company, there's not going to be a high degree of return on that investment. But if you find the element where that swan lives, where that swan brings their full presence, their full authentic self in this case, then it will be much easier to build an organization where they want to be, because it's aligned with their essence. How often have you ever found yourself at work when you discover that there's some very vital, valuable part of yourself that didn't travel there with you? What happens to your soul when your special gifts can't seem to find their place in what you're doing? And how often have you ever been in an organization where you found there's far more talent, brain power, wisdom, and resourcefulness than the job required or even allowed? Stop and reflect on that. Now, I define authenticity as the clarity and the courage to stand fully in the essence of who you are and allow it to be seen and known, where your choices and actions align with what you care about. Now, at this point, I am going to ask Kristen to speak. And what I'd like to hear from you, Kristen, so let me just give you a little background story about Kristen. Kristen is an amazing individual. She is a total spark plug on our team. She is I call her the ever ready bunny that just brings a life and energy to everything she does. Now, she works for an incredible organization, which she'll tell you about. And we would have loved, she's now the vice president of marketing in our company, but she does it in a part-time basis. She works for an incredible company. That company that she works for, I met Kristen about a year ago because they sent their 10 executives to my leadership program. And I was so inspired by all their leaders, but I was particularly inspired by Kristen, who has volunteered much of her time over the last year to contribute to our company. And you have, you work in an organization right now that has really supported your authenticity, Kristen. And I would love to hear from a practical perspective what your company does, who they are, first of all, and what they do to say why you want to stay here. It's not easy to find good people. You want to find, you want to think about how difficult it is to find a good organization. Try to find good employees to fit into that organization. And I just want to stop talking here, Kristen, and let you share what value they bring to your life. How do they make all this real?
Thanks, David. So I work for a company called Telsco Security, based here in Edmonton. I've worked there for 15 years. So as David mentioned, before I started working with David's team, our entire leadership team from Telsco participated in David's masterclass. And one of the most impactful things that I took away from that masterclass was the importance of ensuring that those in our care feel safe, supported, significant, and stretched. And it was such a powerful way for me to understand the responsibility of leadership and how we can create a relationship and a culture that people want to be a part of. So as with many things, I don't live it perfectly, but I am always trying. And when David brought up the question of why I love being where I am and where I work, it was really this lesson that came back to me, that when I think about where I work, I feel incredibly safe, incredibly supported, very significant, and absolutely stretched. So if we're not safe, we are just going to get burnt out. The energy of hiding bits of ourselves is just going to pull all our energy away, and we won't be able to thrive. We won't be able to achieve. So for me, this sense of safety where I am is the foundation. And then the significance comes from that. When you're safe, you can be yourself, you can bring your whole self. And when people appreciate it and speak to you in a way that they know you're going to hear, it's just so powerful. So I just draw a lot of energy from my direct boss and also from our team of leaders. I think something a really great leader can do is identify that, they can't be the single point of support for everything. So they build a great team around them where everybody is supporting one another. And it's just this culture where the load is shared and you're always supported. So that's a little bit of how I related to why I am so happy where I am and why I'm so grateful to work in such a safe place where work is valued, authenticity is valued, and people really, really care.
Kristen, have you got a story of one way that someone on your team has done that with you?
Oh, I am not good with a story right on the spot, David. I might have to think about that for a moment.
Think about it. You think about it for the next 15 minutes, because when we get, I want to drill a little deeper and get and find out a little bit more about what they actually do.
Okay.
To build that kind of a culture. Because we, as much respect as I have for Telsco, we've been wanting we'd offer you a full-time position right now, but your loyalty there is so solid, and I will no longer try to mess with that, because we respect where you want to be, and that is your own authentic self. But I'd like you to think, if you can think of even a specific example of what they've done to help meet those basic fundamental needs that you have. But you hold on to that and I'll let you think.
Okay, perfect.
That's great. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you. But this is an indication of alignment, of authenticity, where the soul's desire meets the world's need. where, you know, you have passions and your gifts, and then the world's need is your duty to give those gifts. But what we've done is that we've neglected in our work around alignment. This is authentic alignment, where we have just given people a job description, where we've given people a job to do, and we haven't created a culture where they get a chance to bring their full gifts. So one of the questions that I ask for people is right now, just take an inventory in your own work life and your own work environment and ask yourself, what percentage of your time is in your sweet spot? I don't think it's necessary. And in fact, I don't even think it's possible to spend 100% of your time in your sweet spot, where your gifts and your passion align with your contribution and your duty. But the question would be, what percentage would you give it right now? Now, at minimum in any job, I would like to think that that's 25%. And what would happen if you were committed, if you had a boss? I don't know how many of you have ever had a job have ever had a performance review where you were asked, how's your sweet spot? You know, how's your sweet satisfaction in your work? And what are we doing to build that? And what if we could take that 25% and make that 35% over the next year? What if we could help you say no to some projects and possibly delegate it to somebody else's sweet spot, and say no to something to make room for what's in your heart, to what you really love to do in your work? Okay. Now this comes back again to pit stop conversations. Now we've had a pit stop conversation with ourselves where we begin to look inside and see what we really truly value and that sense of maturity. But then what we begin to do is to take those alignment conversations into our workplace. And this is what I want to leave you with something that's very practical. And these are the 5 questions. In fact, I'm just going through my team right now, and Kristen and I just had a conversation a couple of weeks ago where we talked about these conversations. And this is an actual way. And again, you can change the terminology here. You can make it your own. You're welcome to borrow mine. You're welcome to steal mine. But these are what we would call pit stop conversations that would bring authentic alignment into a person's life. So our mission, and I'll just go through these one at a time. Our mission, this is, by the way, this is my own, this is our own company, our own team. And so these are real live questions that I've used with my own team. Our mission is focused on creating a more fully human world to live and work in. Why is this mission important to you, and what meaning does it have for you? So Kristen and I had this conversation a couple of weeks ago. Our values are focused on character, courage, compassion, curiosity, and contribution. How do these align with your own personal values? What stories might you have about how any of these values were formed in your own life? What are your own values, and how do they relate to our values? How do you define success in your work and in your life? Describe your ideal workday. What would you like to be doing throughout the day in your ideal job? And answer this question: I'm happy when, at work or away from work? And how does your ideal workday align with what we're offering you here? Now, again, you could come up with your own questions. The point is that you care enough to step off the busyness of the racetrack and to say, where are you really at? And to start to connect with your heart. Kristen, could you just elaborate on what your response was? What worked for you when we went through this together? What didn't work for you? What did you learn from going through that? And part of what we're doing here is a big part of our values is that we want to foster straight talk and honesty and truthfulness. So Kristen, you can put me on the spot here and push back with me about how this experience could have been a better experience for you going into it. Because I think it probably took you a little bit by surprise. And what I know about Kristen is she needs a little bit of preparation before she's put on the spot. But go ahead, Kristen, just react. What was your take on going through this process with me?
So I really enjoyed the process, and I enjoyed the process. And even though I might have been caught a little off guard by some of the questions and might not have been able to articulate my answers really well right off the hop, I enjoyed just the slow down to go through it all together. And it was a really safe place. and we had workshopped some of the questions, and David was really open to maybe changing the way something was presented or making the conversation really work for me to get out of the conversation. What we wanted to do was just slow down and connect and make sure we're aligned. So it was a really great experience. And again, because it was a safe place, I had always felt safe. I felt safe coming into it. I felt safe while we were there. I felt supported. Of course, I felt significant. David's taking the time out of his day to really just say, this is what's really important, is for me to check in with you and see where you're at. And you just walk away from this feeling really appreciated, really supported, and really part of the team.
Yeah, and I know that, like, I live in this world, so I'm constantly reflecting on myself. I'm teaching people, and you're supporting this world, so it's not your first language. So there was some questions here that you pushed back with me, I remember, and say, I need some time to think about that. I mean, I don't know that I even sent this out ahead of time. Did I? Do you remember?
No, I had seen it briefly in the academy, but I didn't have the list ahead of time.
But so you needed some time to reflect on some of these, just like you needed some time to, push back with me this morning and say, no, I need a little bit of time to think about that. And so, and again, you're going to get a whole spectrum of people's readiness to answer these questions, their willingness to answer these questions, and that has to all be respected. But you just want to say, you know what I'm concerned about is making sure that you bring your values to work here. What matters to me is that your values are attended to here. So there's alignment, not just to placate you and meet all of your values, but we want to align our values and your values and make sure that we fit you here. And that if there isn't a fit here, then let's help you move on. But let's work toward a good, solid fit. And when people have a fit, that, when they have a fit, it's a bad terminology, but when they fit and they can really bring who they are to what they do, organizations then become unstoppable. And you can't guarantee that you're going to have loyalty for the rest of a person's career. But if they do move on, you're going to get their best self. Okay. Now, then what we do is that we turn these pit stop conversations into pit stop agreements. So what expectations do you have of us to ensure that you stay engaged? What is the best way to talk to each other if we aren't meeting each other's expectation? What kind of environment do you need to inspire you to come to work in every day? And what do you see as a leader's responsibility to make that happen? And what do you see as everyone's responsibility, i.e. yours, to make that happen? Have you ever worked in an organization where leaders did not demonstrate their values? How was that experience for you when there was not that commitment? What we are committed to is not having you have that experience here. How can we work together to ensure that we live our values here? What agreements will we make to each other? What are some things that make it hard for you to support me? What are things that I do that make it hard for you to support me? Any feedback that you have for me about my leadership, what would you like me to stop doing? What you would like me to start doing, and what you'd like me to continue to do. And I would suggest that you have these kind of frequent formal, more than once a year. There should be no, I would say regularly. Now, again, what's going to make it relevant? You could discuss that. In my opinion, you could review these at least every 3 months in a formal way. But you could say, how are we going to set this up so that we have a regular conversation, so there's regular opportunities to give me feedback? Kristen, was there anything that you would add to this agreement page?
Oh, no, I don't have anything specifically to add to this page. I just love the whole concept of agreements and expectations and all the clarity that comes out of this.
Well, and I must tell you that one of the reasons that you're such a good team player is because you're so accountable, and you're a great citizen, if you will, on our team. All right. So folks, that is my presentation. And I would ask you to really look at where's your strength in the culture that you work in. You can apply this to a family, frankly. Where's the strength in your culture? Are you building a safe, supported community where people can open up their values, can talk about what matters to them? Is there a sense of fostering maturity? Are you hiring for maturity? Are you hiring for citizenship? Granted, you're in a labor shortage, but I would suggest that you want to make sure that you know what your values are and what you're hiring for. And I would rather have a fewer numbers of mature employees than a large numbers of immature ones, because you're just hiring for skill rather than hiring for attitude and for character. And then authenticity. How are you really aligning your organization? And maybe you can foster maturity through good, honest conversations and agreements in that alignment process. Okay. Again, I want to reiterate, if you want to go deeper with this material, we're happy to answer any questions that you have either now, or you can reach out to me on your own around our upcoming Leadership Academy in person in the spring, and these SAGE forums, these peer mentoring support groups going forward. All right. Having said that, and if you would like any to order any books with discount, with good aggressive discount for bulk orders, just feel free to reach out to Val and let us know if these would have any value for you over the holidays. All right. Having said that, I'm going to